Here we go. All right. Mr. Dowling grew up in, was born in Knockaderry, Limerick in Ireland in the mid-1950s. He's the oldest of 5 children. Excuse me for reading, but I want to make sure I get everything in. He earned his undergraduate degree from the University College Cork, making him the first in his family to graduate from college. He paid for tuition working manual labor jobs in London and the US, traveling back and forth from Ireland during the summers between the academic years. And he received his MA from Fordham after settling in the United States. Mr. Dowling's professional career has been focused primarily on the healthcare services in the public and private sectors in New York. He started in academics at Fordham, then worked for New York State for 12 years, 7 of which as State Director of Health Education and Human Services and as Deputy Secretary to Governor Mario Cuomo. For the last 21 years, he has been the President and CEO of Northwell Health on Long Island. He also sits on a number of boards, including Smurfit School of Business at UCD, UCD Dublin as chair, and the Institute for Healthcare Improvement also as chair. Bit of a Renaissance man, Mr. Dowling is a champion hurler and the author of at least 2 books, one of which is autobiography, After the Roof Caved In. I'll show this up here, is the basis for our discussion today. So welcome, Mr. Dowling. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay. Well, let's start. I said you were oldest of 5 children. You want to just give us some background on your family, your siblings, your parents, what they did for a living?
Sure. As you mentioned, I grew up in a little rural village, Knockaderry in West Limerick. There were 5 of us. I was the oldest. I had 3 brothers and 1 sister. There's 4 of us now left. One of my younger brothers passed away last November.
Oh, sorry.
My father was a county council worker, basically laborer working on the roads, but his health was always poor, especially when he got to his late 30s. So he suffered terribly from arthritis. And when he was about 42, he could not work anymore. He was pretty well crippled with arthritis, pretty much on every part of his body. My mother was a wonderful, wonderful lady. She was deaf, totally deaf. But she was basically the person who motivated everybody in the family, including me. The home we lived in was not totally unique at that time, but pretty unique in the neighborhood. It was a thatched house with no electricity, no running water, no bathrooms. We did not even have an outhouse, and no heat except for the open fireplace. And I went to local school, primary school, and then I went to high school in a local village, a town, now Castle West, which was about 5 miles away, which we bicycled or walked to. It was, we didn't have much materially. It was a lot of poverty, some difficulty. My father was not the best. He drank. Fortunately, he didn't have that much money to drink all the time, but it was a life that, in many ways, the way I look at it, it strengthens you. It gives you some sense of resilience and education was important. My mother was an unbelievable person in many ways, but she read a lot. She always had books around. So one of my favorite pastimes, which still is to this day, by the way, is reading and studying, learning history, economics, or whatever. So I grew up reading all the time. And my mother had books available. I never knew where she got them, but she always had them available. And so that instilled in me a real love of learning and motivated me that I had to get out of there. I had to get out of Knockaderry. I remember as a kid saying to myself, I'm getting out of here because there is no real future here. And I have to figure out a way to go to college. So that's how I ended up leaving home when I was 16, and I went to England And the purpose was to figure out how to make money to pay for college, and also, of course, to help out at home a little bit because there was no money and things are pretty tough. But when I go back now to Knockaderry, where I grew up, it's a beautiful, picturesque place. It's gorgeous. But today it is so different. It's hard to imagine that it was like the way it was when I grew up, because it has modernized phenomenally. Beautiful homes around the place, cars in every driveway. When I grew up, the way you got around was walking, bicycle, or rode a donkey. If you had a donkey, or you borrowed a donkey from a neighbor. But my story is not that different from an awful lot of people who grew up at that time. But growing up in an environment like that in many ways motivates you and forces you and gets you to think about what's better. And I've said many times, I kind of look over the horizon wondering what was on the other side, because you couldn't go too far from home back then. You could only go as far as you could ride a bicycle or walk. And so your world was very small. But given the fact that I read all of the time, I always imagined things somewhere else, and that they needed to be explored, and there was possibilities of better opportunities there. So,
but how about with why America? Were there other? It sounded like if no one was leaving your community,
well, I mean, a lot of people traditionally had left, the community, older people, and they had gone to England. Some had gone to the United States. So I went to England initially, and I worked on steel factories in Crawley, south of London. And I worked long hours, and I was fortunate enough to get into college in Cork, UCC. My high school grades were good enough that I qualified to get into college. I remember being in London in the steel factory when I got the results of the leaving certificate, which is the high school certificate. And I qualified for college. But then, of course, the question was, how do I afford to go? So when I came back from England, I had enough money to help pay part of the tuition. And then the first year in college, I worked in construction. I would work 1 week in construction and the next week in college. So I worked pretty much through the first year. And then the question was at the end of the first year, so what do I do now? And of course, as I grew up, everybody believed that, the streets are paved with gold in New York. New York is the place where opportunity blossoms. And if you come to New York, and I knew people and had met people that had come back from the United States and had visited when I was young, that I had been to the United States and, of course, told glorious stories about it. So I decided to come to the United States. And I was very lucky. I came over here. I got a job on the docks in west side of Manhattan, which required very long hours. I mean, I worked 7 days a week. I never took time off.
There's a Circle
and I didn't
Line?
want to take time off.
You worked for the Circle Line, not one of the tugboats?
Yeah, I worked on the tugboats as well, Moran's tugboats, Circle Line. And then I would go back to Cork in the summertime and go to college. I did that for 2 to 3 years. The money I'd made here paid for me to pay for my college, and also helped me actually to give. I always went back with an envelope of money for my mother. In fact, I used to send money to my mother every couple of weeks because things are so bad that gave me extra pleasure. So I worked as many hours as I could possibly work to make as much money as I could, so I could not only pay my own education, but send money home. And college was also very important to me because sports was important in college. So I ended up playing on the college hurling team at UCC. We won lots of championships. So sports was very, very important for me. And I was fortunate I was pretty good. But I went back and forth for a couple of years. And then when I graduated college, I came back to the United States. At that time, I didn't plan to stay here. I figured I'd work here for a while, see what happened. But I always had in the back of my head that I would go back to Ireland. But as things happen, of course, as you know, you evolve, you develop a network here. you see opportunities here that I couldn't see happening at home. So I stayed, and I'd say, I'll stay for another year, I'll stay for another year. And of course, it lasted and went on and on and on. And I didn't get my citizenship, US citizenship, for a good, I'd say, 15 years. Because in my mind, I was always going back. And then,
what about your siblings? Did they have any interest in following you?
yes, my next brother to me, Joseph, Joe, which I wrote about in the book, he went through some rough times. He had very difficult situation with my father. He left home and disappeared for quite a while. I found out later he went to England, but we never knew where he was. We went looking for him. My mother even went to England looking for him, thinking he might be there. So, and he ended up getting into the army. He was never interested in coming over here. My other brother, Sean, the guy that passed away last November, he was always interested in coming over here. But it was, as time went on, it became very, very difficult to get a visa. Much more difficult. I mean, my visa when I came here was a J1 visa. I came as a student visa. And so that's how it legitimized me here. And then, of course, I got married here as well. And then that obviously helped. I didn't get married to get a visa. Some people do that. I didn't do that. But it happened that it helped out. All of my siblings have been here, but none have actually came and stayed. My youngest brother came here and spent a few months with me. I got him a job part-time at the UN. They all would have, many of them would have liked to come here if it had been easy and if the visa situation was not as difficult. My guess is some of them would probably have come here, but they were also attached at home and they had things going on at home. So I ended up being the only member of the family who stayed here.
Yeah, your story is similar, but it's unusual for the post-war period because you came in the 60s when a lot of Irish who had already come after the war are starting to head back to Ireland. And then the 65 law changed the situation for a lot of people, as you said. I was going to ask if you had a sponsor or what was the pathway towards citizenship or green card that allowed you to stay for so many years before you became a citizen?
Well, I got married for a couple of years here. And my wife was an American citizen. And obviously that legitimized me here. That was the reason I was able to stay.
Yeah.
I ended up going into Fordham University, in fact, being a student there and then getting on faculty at Fordham. And it wasn't until I joined the Cuomo administration that I went and became a citizen. I was always worried when I joined government with Mario Cuomo that somebody would find out that I wasn't a citizen, because I had this strange idea in my head that if you wanted to work in government, you had to be a citizen, which of course was not true. But that's what I believed at the time. So a year or two after I joined the Cuomo administration, I applied for the citizenship, went for the test, and then became. Yeah,
because obviously you couldn't vote. So.
No, I couldn't. Right, it's true. I couldn't. And so, but all during my Fordham career, when I was there for quite a number of years, I worked in construction and I worked as a plumber at the plumbing companies. And I did a lot. I did basically everything I could possibly do to make a living. I would work 24/7. I never took time off. I would say a workaholic. I love work. It's my enjoyment. And so I would take as many jobs as I possibly could. And in many ways, I got lucky. I mean, I met a lot of very good people. Fordham University was very helpful. I built my confidence an awful lot. And then when they asked me to come back and become an adjunct and then go on full-time faculty, that was pretty extraordinary. And then I went on to Columbia University to pursue a doctorate. So I did all my doctoral work. I passed my examination, turned in my dissertation. I probably had about 2 to 3 months left to do my work. I had all my coursework, everything done. when the Cuomo administration asked me to, if I would join them and offer me a job in Albany, and I put the dissertation in the trunk of my car, planning that next weekend I would fix it. Well,
It's still
it
there.
probably is still in the trunk of the car someplace because I sold the car.
Your ABD, as we say, all the
ABD.
dissertation, yeah.
And, you know, Fordham University would call me regularly saying, or I mean, Columbia University, and say, you know, why don't you come back and finish? You've got it done. I mean, you were, you know, one of the top students. Why don't you come back? But I got so busy in government. I was, you know, the governor continually promoted me. I became his top advisor on health and human services. I was involved in almost everything that happened in government, and it was exciting. It opened up a whole new, you know, whole new possibilities, and it was a wonderful educational experience. And he was a fabulous guy to work for.
Yeah.
And I became very, very, very close to him and the family. I probably became one of his closest confidants outside of his family. And I'm still very, very close to the family.
He probably, do you think maybe he saw some similarities there with the similar kind of immigrant background, the work ethic, education?
Well, yeah, he would talk about it. I mean, he had somewhat of a similar background. I mean, he grew up in Queens, and but his family had come from Italy. And you know, my mother came. After my father died, I brought my mother to the U.S. every year for a month, and I did that for 19 years consecutively. And she became very friendly with the governor. And he, even though she was completely deaf, he gave her a personal tour of the Capitol in Albany. They became pen pal friends. They wrote to one another. And there's one wonderful little story where there was some article in a newspaper in Ireland about me. And my mother wrote a letter to the Governor Cuomo saying how proud she was of me. So the governor sent me the letter with a covering note saying the following, and I have this letter, I actually have it framed someplace. It said, "This is a letter from your mother. She's very proud of you. And isn't it amazing, he said, how you and I have fooled our mothers."
Oh, that's so
he had
sweet.
a wonderful turn of phrase.
Yeah. You know, it strikes me that obviously you've had great success here, but the recurring through line seems to be hard work and education.
Well, I believe, and you know, right now I hire about 300 people a week, and that's every week, and I've been doing that for years, and I meet every one of them, and I answer all their questions, and when they ask me a question of how to succeed, I say, there's no substitute for hard work. You put in the effort, you don't complain. If you're going to have anything to complain about, be constructive, and have a high level of curiosity. In other words, continue to educate yourself. Education. One of the first things I did when I became CEO was I created the equivalent of an in-house corporate university in the organization for the purpose of providing opportunities for learning for everybody, and to create a culture of continuous learning. So to me, it's all about putting your effort in, being decent, have integrity, be trustworthy, have your work count, work hard, but continue to educate yourself. I mean, I am still educating myself every week. I read like crazy all the time.
I'm curious about your mother. Fascinates me for a couple of reasons. Was she an educated? Did she get an education?
She went to high school. I don't believe she ever graduated high school, but she read all the time. I mean, she could talk. When she was with Governor Cuomo over here, she could talk about American politics because she read. So she didn't have a school learning, but she had life learning. And she took it very seriously. I mean, I remember as a kid in the house, when we even didn't have electricity, I remember reading Shakespeare. I remember reading the speeches of Churchill as a kid. She had them in the round, and she always, and I wrote about this, she always emphasized the fact that your current circumstance should not curtail your future opportunities. She always said, wherever you are today, it's no predictor of where you could be in the future. She had a very positive disposition. She was, despite the fact that her life was tough, she never would regard herself having a disability. She had a hard life, but she was continuously positive. Good things are always around the corner.
How did she communicate? Did she have sign language skills, read lips? What did she do?
She read lips. She never did sign language. She wore a hearing aid, which was kind of funny because it didn't help at all. I mean, but she thought by having it on, and it was a hearing aid with a big box in the front, one of these old-fashioned things. But of course, it didn't do anything. It just, I don't know, somehow psychologically, she felt that she had it on, and she would wear it sometimes. But if she was looking at you, she would figure out what you're talking about, especially if she got used to you after a while.
But then how would she ask a question or continue in a conversation?
Oh, she would ask you she'd ask you to repeat, and she was very good lip reading. She'd ask you to repeat, and
so she could talk. She had enough hearing that. Oh, okay.
Well, let me clarify. Yeah, she lost her hearing when she was about 6 or 7 years old.
Okay. Okay.
So she could talk. Oh yeah. I still don't know for sure how she lost her hearing. There were two stories. One was that she was badly beaten by a teacher one time around the head, which was not uncommon back then, including when I went to school. I don't think that was it. The best evidence I have is that she was given medication for a cold and a flu that she had. I forget the name of the medication, but if you took it in inappropriate dosage, it caused hearing loss.
Interesting.
So I think that was the reason. I've never got empirical proof of that. That's what she thought as well. She would talk about the beating on the head that she got, but she believes it was that medication that she was given to her. And back then, of course, they didn't know the dosage like they do today. But she did know how to speak. Yeah.
Okay. And then your dad was more not as interested or a little more bitter about education opportunity?
Yeah, he had a very tough life himself. I appreciate it now more than I did when I was growing up with him. He was a tough guy, but he was not treated well by his family at all. He was very, very smart, but never had much education, had to go to work very, very young. I always felt that he was upset about that. He would never talk about it. He was was a very hard worker, quite impatient. When you came home, or when he came home, you never knew exactly what was going to walk in the door. He could be friendly, or it could be something awful. So there were lots of altercations, lots that I had to get involved in, to protect my mother. But as he got older, you get to appreciate his circumstance. And I look back at it now, and I have to say to myself that, I didn't like him much back then, and maybe I was wrong. I didn't understand his background. But he died when he was 61. But he walked around with canes for like 20 years. I mean, he couldn't do anything.
Do you think the circumstances of your parents and where you grew up influenced your career path into healthcare?
Well, yes. In fact, when people ask me that question, I think the reason that I ended up being interested in health and human services, which is what I've always done, in many ways was because of the circumstance at home, the poverty at home, the lack of healthcare, the lack of dental care. Nobody treated you dentally back then. I mean, I lost probably a third of my teeth when I was young, because whenever you had a tooth problem back then, they pulled the tooth. My youngest brother had all his teeth pulled when he was 13. He went to the dentist and had an infection. And so they said, well, we better pull them all because all the teeth will get infected. So he's had no teeth. All of my brothers the same way. So I have no teeth back here, and my front teeth are fake because I got them knocked out playing hurling. But that was worth it. I would play that game again. I would just keep my mouth away from the hurling.
That's strange.
Well, back to when you first came to the States. So, the typical immigrant story is that an Irish person comes in and they'll go into an Irish neighborhood, they'll network at the local bar or the church or the county organizations, find job opportunities or people from home. I mean, what was your experience coming over?
Well,
I went back and forth, which is a little interesting too.
There was, I had relatives in the United States. I did not know them well.
In where?
In the United States.
Oh, okay.
In Florida and elsewhere. I did have a family that lived in New Rochelle. And one of the people was a guy named Chris O'Mara. He was a cousin. And I connected with him. He connected me with some others. He was quite helpful. But I worked all the time. So for the first couple of years, I didn't socialize at all. I had a very simple purpose: work, pay for college, have enough money to help out at home. I did very little socialization.
So you didn't
do the network. I remember my first Thanksgiving, an Italian co-worker who worked down on the boats with me invited me to New Jersey to Thanksgiving dinner, and very Italian family, which I learned something interesting culturally, that when they start eating at 12 and they don't finish until 6 that evening. And when you're Irish, you eat quickly and get away from the table. But when you went to the Italian family, I couldn't believe how they could eat for so long. And but I learned, and so you get, and that creates a bit of a network. So it was never difficult for me.
Yeah.
I was so happy doing what I was doing. I was so happy to be able to pay my way through school. I was happy to go back and play hurling again. I was happy to help out at home. So it was not a difficult situation for me, even though from an academic perspective, it may appear that way. But I used to work 100 hours a week, 110, 120 hours a week. But that's what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't be where I am today, my guess is, if I hadn't done that. So, but I still work 100 hours a week. That hasn't changed much.
I have a feeling you continue to work that well. 50
Yes.
hours will seem like a vacation.
Yeah.
Going back and forth, was your intent, because I think in the book you say, like you said, that the intent was always to stay and to go and settle in Ireland. Did you think you were going to stay around Knockaderry? Were you going to go to Dublin, another big city?
Oh, I would probably not have ever stayed in the Knockaderry. I mean, there was nothing to do unless you wanted to milk cows for a local farm as a livelihood, and I did that as a kid. If I had gone back, it would have been probably to Dublin.
Okay.
I did not know Dublin that well back then because I hadn't been to Dublin. Maybe once I was in Dublin, so I didn't really know the city. But if I had left to go back, it would definitely have been in Dublin or some other urban place like that. Knockaderry is still a beautiful place. I mean, it's a great place to visit. But today, people work today in Limerick, they work in Shannon, they work in Ennis, and they live in Knockaderry because now with the roads are so good and transportation is so different, it's a half an hour, 40-minute drive.
Yeah.
When I leave my house here to go to work every morning, it takes me 45 to 50 minutes.
Yeah.
So, in many ways, Knockaderry is a bedroom now for Limerick City, people who work in Limerick City. But when I grew up, that was impossible. First of all, the roads are not that good. Secondly, there were very few cars around the place. So, progress changes things. I mean, it's a very different environment it is anymore.
I mean, it's kind of interesting because that's really just a generation from when you were a young man.
Very quickly.
Yeah.
Very quickly. Yeah, it happened. You know, the Celtic Tiger happened not too long, much later. And, you know, sometimes when you talk to people about how I grew up, I mean, it's hard for some people to recognize that it's that recent, but how
Right.
much this changed in such a short period of time. What's interesting is my youngest sister and brother, they grew up in a different world than I grew up in. There's 12 years between us,
Yeah.
yet they didn't live my life. My father was basically crippled at that point and was an okay at that time. I mean, the world had changed.
Mhm.
And my sister remembers some of it. My younger brother really doesn't, because that in that 12 years, there was a transformation.
Yeah.
Pretty
Yeah.
dramatic.
The 80s, New Irish, then the Celtic Tiger, then
Sure.
the 2008 crash, and now since then,
Yeah.
everything's
Yeah.
upwardly mobile.
Yeah. You know, I go back last time I was in Knockaderry, I go to the hurling pitch, and they have a you know, a beautiful building where people go into the building, and they, you know, they have locker rooms, etc., etc. You know, when I played, we put our clothes under the bush, hoping that it wouldn't rain on them too much. It was so completely different.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I was wondering, you seem to have a very close relationship with the head of UCC. Was he disappointed that you decided to stay in America? Were they interested
No.
in your career? You know, are
Yeah.
you staying?
Yeah, way back,
in
I got very close to the president because I was very active in student politics. I was the vice president of student council. I was on the president's, he had it was called the President's Council. I was on his President's Council. I was a student rep. I was one that always tried to resolve problems and you know, because back those days you had the mousy tongue followers and you had a lot of craziness going on campus, and I was always the one that tried to get people to rationalize. So I became very close to the many presidents and very close to the professors, and none of them discouraged me at all. I mean, they all wrote glowing references for me when I needed them to get into college here.
Mm-hmm.
They were always all very happy. I'm still very involved with UCC, as I am with UCD and with UCG right now, and with Limerick. I'm a chair. I was the chairperson of an advisory committee for the Limerick Medical School. So I'm quite involved. I've been on a number of the commissions on healthcare in Ireland, etc. So I try to contribute as much as I possibly can. And I've got an honorary doctorate from UCD and one from Queen's University as well. In fact, I was just on the phone yesterday with people from Queen's University. So I stay involved as much as I possibly can. I think it's an important responsibility. I'm Irish. You know, the way I look at it, I'm very proud to be Irish, and I'm very proud to be an American. And I'm American Irish, which is probably the best combination you could ever possibly find.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You know, I was struck by something you said in your book about seeing American tourists come into your town as a young man. And you were struck, obviously, by their what you would have thought affluence, but really just the ability that they could vacation and come over to Ireland, but also that they all, in addition to being well-dressed and well-spoken, that they seem to have some kind of purpose in their life, that they were doing good things.
Yeah, I mean, I remember many of them quite well. I mean, they were, you know, first of all, they had a rented car. They were dressed well, and they spoke pretty well. They could talk about what they were doing in America. They, you know, in some cases, very, very good at exaggeration. I mean, there was one particular individual who told me that he had a swimming pool. I came to New York, and I'm thinking, I remember when he told me that while I was in Ireland as a kid, I couldn't believe a house with a swimming pool. We didn't even have running water. How could you have a swimming pool? So when I came to New York, I actually went and visited. And the swimming pool was one of those plastic things that you have in the back of you that you fill up with water. And it was a swimming pool. But if you know the way he described it, it was this grandiose thing surrounded landscape and everything. That was fine. But everything is relative. You know, plastic swimming pool was a big promotion from where I was at that time. So that was fantastic. But yes, but I read there is an author named Zane Grey, who is a famous author of American Western books about American Midwest. I read all of those books as a kid. In fact, I have all the books here in my house. And I loved reading Zane Grey. So I knew an awful lot about America by my reading. I studied the Hudson River. I knew what the Palisades were. In fact, in one of a high school tests, I was asked to write about the Hudson River and the Palisades. And I wrote a paper. I knew more about the Hudson River and the Palisades before ever I got here than many of the people who live here know.
I would say you're probably right.
It's the old story. If you visit New York, you visit the Statue of Liberty. If you live in New York, you don't visit the Statue of Liberty. But I love reading about America, and I'm a history buff. So I love reading, and I remember as a kid reading about Abe Lincoln and Thomas Jefferson and Ben Franklin, etc. And, you know, it was all like, you know, oh my God, these things are possible. But, you know, it opens up the envelope of your mind, you know, to allow you to explore and to think. And that still gives me joy to be able to learn, because no matter how much you know, what you don't know is much greater. So you've got to keep trying to learn as much as you possibly can. In fact, I had this past 3 days, I had a retreat for my organization, and we have about 85,000 employees. So I have about 325 senior leaders, and I take them all away every year for a 2-day retreat. At the retreat, which I do every year, and I do this every quarter, I hand out a list of books that I have read, and I encourage them to read those books. So those books were on display at the retreat. My recommendations about what it is you should do to expand your knowledge base to read. And it's not about healthcare. They're not necessarily about healthcare at all.
Your list, what was on your list this time?
There's a book about the women scientists called Exceptions. There is a book, in fact, I have the list here someplace in front of me. There's a book about the history of GE.
About T?
General Electric.
Oh, GE, okay.
Company. Was it? Oh yeah, and there's I can send you the list.
No, I was just I didn't mean to put you on the spot. I was just interested in what kind of selections. Is it any fiction or is it mostly nonfiction?
No fiction. Hold on, I'm going to see if I can find it here. I just was looking at it a while ago. I don't know, maybe I can't find it quickly, but no fiction. It's all. One of the books is the book 1619. It's about the book that gets very controversial by some people, but it's many ways the history of slavery, and that's a great book to read. So I'm just blanking on them now.
No, that's okay. We're getting near the end here. I had one question. You've had a really interesting life back and forth in the U.S. You're settled here now. Do you have any general comments about how Ireland has shaped the U.S. and how the U.S. may have shaped Ireland? I mean, it's an immigrant country, and you could say that two have a very special relationship because not just as Ireland is an exporter of people, but the close ties, the back and forth, like yourself, going from from one place to the other and never losing that connection.
Well, I think, the histories are very unbelievably intertwined. I mean, many of Abe Lincoln's, advisors, many of his helpers were Irish, Irish people, the Declaration of Independence. The Irish fought in the Civil War, the fighting 16 9. The migration from Ireland, immigration from Ireland in the 1820s and 1830s. Everybody focuses on the 1860s and 70s after the famine, but there was a huge migration from Ireland in the 1820s and 1830s. And Irish people have played a huge role, in along with so many others, in the creation of what the United States is. And they dealt with a lot of discrimination and when they got here, and a lot of hostility against them when they got here, but they overcome that and overcame it and became very, very American. And likewise, the American influence on the Irish and Ireland is huge. So they're very much intertwined. They hardly have to go any place in the United States. And I travel quite a bit, and I'm involved in an awful lot of things nationally. It is almost impossible to go any place without coming across people of Irish background, of Irish heritage. You look at CEOs in Wall Street today. Brian Moynihan, for example, the head of Bank of America, Irish background. I know pretty well.
The president.
Pretty much everybody, today, even President Biden, with the Irish background. So it's unbelievably intertwined. And I think it is positive for both. The Irish contribution to the building of the Erie Canal, the contribution of the railroads, bringing the country together, the fight for independence. I mean, you can go on and on and on.
Yeah.
And, in many ways, the Irish wanted America to be America because it wasn't England.
Excuse me, my computer came unplugged.
Looking, I just found a list of books. I actually interviewed at the retreat last week. On Thursday, Indra Nooyi, she's the former CEO of PepsiCo. And she has a great book, Her Life in Full. The other great book is Good Power by Ginny Romney, who headed IBM. Now, there's a book about McKinsey. When McKinsey comes to town, there's a book about the consulting firm. Not a very positive book about them, by the way. And another great book is Hearts Touched by Fire by David Gergen, who was White House advisor to 3 presidents. That's a fabulous book. And of course, he has Irish background as well. So a
lot of cross-pollination.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we're getting near the end of our Q&A here. I'd like to open it up to our panel. I'm going to see. Let's see. I'm just trying to see how I can unmute everybody. Would anybody like to ask Mr. Dowling a question? I'll unmute you from here.
Yes, if I may ask a question. I noticed that you mentioned the tugboats, working on the tugboats. And
very briefly, Moran tugs.
I know a lot of the companies were completely Irish dominated.
Oh, sure.
McAllister Tug.
Yeah, well, the 2 companies were McAllister and Moran.
Yeah, I wonder, McAllister was famous because practically all their employees came from the Glens of Antrim. Was there anything like that in Moran?
No, I don't think so. Not I knew of, and it was very, very brief then. But I knew about the McAllister. I knew a little bit about the history of the McAllisters, but I basically spent pretty much all my time at the Circle Line and on the docks of the West Side.
One of our members wrote a book about growing up in Inwood, and
sure, in the Bronx. Yeah,
and the title of the book is about the Circle Line because they were a very Irish family, and the Circle Line was kind of surrounding her because it appeared a couple of times a day, and they were always reminded of the fact that Circle Line was a very Irish institution at that time, And
Yeah, it was. It was the owners. I did not know them, but the owners were. I think the name was Barry's. I worked in the engine room, so I was down under the water most of the time. But it was enjoyable. If you were willing to work and put in long hours. I mean, I put in very, very long hours there, and it paid very, very well. I made quite a lot of money back in 1968, 69, 70. So when I would do that for 6, 7 months, I was able to go back to Ireland and pay full college. Never had to borrow money. Was able to manage my own upkeep and help out at home. So, there was nothing to be upset about with that in that regard. It was a very, very positive experience.
One of our members raised a question a few minutes ago, and it was if you could speak to how you made the transition from government work to healthcare work.
Well, when I was in government, I had responsibility for all health in the state of New York. I oversaw all healthcare, mental health, alcoholism, substance abuse, education, all the disability fields, etc., alcoholism. So I was the governor's top person overseeing it all. So I was very intimately involved in healthcare from the government's point of view. Now, the government didn't run these facilities. We regulated and had oversight. We did run psychiatric facilities. So I was very, very involved with mental health back then. So I became quite well known in the healthcare field, not just only in New York, but also nationally because of my role with the governor. When I left there after 12 years, I ended up joining an insurance company, a healthcare insurance company, which I worked in as a senior person for almost a year. And then I was recruited to come to a big hospital in Long Island called North Shore Hospital. I was a little familiar with it from my time in government. So I was recruited to come in as a chief operating officer at this hospital. This is back in the early 90s. And at the time, all of the hospitals were separate and individual here. There were no big systems. So my goal was to help create a large system where you bring all of the pieces of healthcare together. And so I came in to North Shore as chief operating officer. They had begun this process with one other hospital, and then I started to expand it. And today we're the largest provider of healthcare in the state of New York. But the background, I did have the background from my government.
Right. Thank you.
Anybody else?
I got another question. Do you think it's valuable to have other Irish immigrants as kind of a support network for people coming over from Ireland? And was that your case, or could you have gone it alone without?
Well, I pretty much did it alone myself, but it's very helpful to have a network. It's also helpful though to have a network that inspires you to get better. I know a lot of Irish people, their network is, this is not meant to be a criticism. It's a fact, at least it was, where there'd be a network of Irish and they were bartenders or bus drivers. And I hung around with a group like that at one time. And when they found out that I was going to university and became a member of Forum at Fordham University, I wasn't treated that well. It looked like I went above and beyond my station in life. So you need a group of people around you that inspires you to do more than what you think you can do. That's the network that I would aspire to be in. And I'm very involved with the many Irish who come over. I bring a lot of Irish students over. I have for years and years and years. I give them a lot of internships. I pay them when they're here and they go back. But the whole purpose is to get them, to show them an opportunity give them an advantage to see opportunities they may not otherwise see. So the network is great. You just got to make sure you create a network that is there for not just only socialization, but also it's a network that enhances people's aspirations.
Mhm.
And so I'm quite involved in that, and I have for 20 years, 30 years almost brought students from Ireland, and I'm very involved with UCD and UCC and with Limerick, and people come and they do internships with me. And I go back and I'm very involved with the Royal College of Physicians in Dublin, the Royal College of Surgeons in Dublin, etc. So yeah, but in answer to your question, a network is very, very important. But also, I always even tell my own kids, be careful of the network you hang around with.
Mm.
It'll either keep you at level, take you down, or inspire you to go up.
To go up. John, do you have another question?
I do actually, and I'll keep this to the last one.
Okay.
The number of Irish in this country, Michael, if I may call you that,
Sure.
has diminished dramatically. And up to now, I think sheer numbers have enabled an Irish community to kind of set its own appearance to the rest of the world. I think that as we vanish in numbers, that the way we're looked at will be dictated by others in this country that may not always look as favorably on us as we do ourselves.
Well, I mean, back in history, there was a lot of people that didn't look favorably upon us at all. I mean, and we still survived. I mean, the first groups of immigrants that came here, had a real rough time. And I think that it would be great to be, and I know many of you are working on this, to open up the immigration more, so that more people have the opportunity to come over. But I am still very optimistic. There's an awful lot of people here, and non-Irish as well, with an awful lot of respect for the Irish. And in every facet of life, you've got to gain the respect as well. You've got to be, you got to do the right thing. You've got to behave the right way. You've got to demonstrate through your own characteristics what positivity is. So I'm not pessimistic about this. I do think it would be great to see more Irish come. But we're much more in a global world now. The world is is easier now. You can, I can go from my home to Staten Island. Takes me, depending on traffic, take me 4.5 hours. I could almost be in Dublin at the same time.
That's true.
So, the world has got so much smaller. My daughter, who's a nurse, loves to go back and forth to Ireland. She's got lots of Irish friends. Her association with Ireland, because of the ability to go back and forth, is much tighter than a lot of the Irish that were here years ago and didn't have that possibility to go back and forth. So I think the communication, the technology that's available today, that location is not as important as it was in the past, because you can be in constant communication all the time, just like we are here today. So no, I'm still optimistic. I think the Irish will always be looked upon as a people that are an inspiration to others. We just got to continue to make sure we always do the right thing ourselves. So we deserve that appreciation.
Kathleen, did you have a question?
Linda, there's a must-ask question from Kathleen Walker.
Okay. Yep.
Must ask. Hi, Mr. Dowling. I find your story so inspiring, and the hard work ethic, there was nothing else that I could do in my life but work very, very hard to achieve also. So I very much identify with that. And all the people you've helped, there's just hundreds of thousands, and I just think it's terrific. So, but I want to tell you that I wound up in a Northwell hospital after side effects from the vaccines.
Right.
And I got the best care ever.
Oh, thank you. Which hospital was that?
It was in the West Village in Manhattan by St. Vincent's
Oh, yeah,
Hospital,
down in Greenwich Village. Yeah.
Greenwich Village.
Lennox,
So
Yeah.
Lennox
Yeah.
Healthcare.
Yeah.
you've done a great job.
Yeah, we have, I've got 21 hospitals and I've got about 900 outpatient locations. But I'm also one of the largest academic teaching places. We got our own medical school, nursing school, graduate nursing school, PhD school, huge research, because it's all interconnected. And, but, you know, no matter how well you do, you're not doing as well as you know you could. So every day you get up, the goal is to be better today than you were yesterday. So I'm never completely satisfied because there's always another rung in the ladder to climb.
Great job.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I have one other question. Your own children, you said your daughter's a nurse. Is your son in healthcare? You've got a
Yes.
daughter and a son.
My son is a radiologic technologist, but he actually works in the health system. He oversees all the technology, all the radiologic technology in the health system, which is huge. And my daughter is a cancer nurse. She treats cancer
Wow.
patients. That's what she does full time.
God bless her.
She's getting married in August. So all my Irish family will be coming over in August.
That'll be fun.
So it'll be fun. Let's hope.
What do your kids consider themselves Irish American? Was that an emphasis in your house for them growing up?
Oh
That
yeah,
Yeah.
kids are Irish. I mean, oh absolutely. I mean, my daughter can sing any Irish song that you put in front of her. She knows more Irish song than I do. She goes to every Irish event. Where I'm very involved. My wife and I are very involved with the Irish Arts Centre. And Larry Glocksman is a good old friend of mine.
Mm-hmm.
So we're involved in all of the Irish events to the extent that the calendar allows us to be involved. We get involved and we contribute. And you know, now whenever I retire, I hope to be able to do more in the Irish, with Irish organizations, whenever that's going to be. But at some point.
Doesn't sound like you're ready to retire very.
Well,
in
I'll
the near
never
future.
retire. You just change roles.
Right, right.
You know,
Different job.
retirement. That's God's waiting room. That's what I don't want to be in. So you don't ever retire. You open up another chapter in the book.
Got it.
Yeah.
Anybody else have any questions?
What were your peers like in Knockaderry when you were growing up? Were they eager to come to America also?
My peers.
Yeah.
No, hardly anyone that grew up with me. They were. I was one of the few from my age group that left. It was a farming community. People were basically staying at home. If they went any place, they went to England or Dublin. And that is from my local community. Very few of them, in fact, none of my friends that I can recall came to the United States. All the guys I played with in hurling, guys, Knockaderry had a famous hurling team. We won a lot of competitions. I went back recently, a couple of years ago, for a reunion of a championship team. And they've all basically still live in the area. I'd say 80% of them still live in the area.
And they're still farmers, or have they branched out?
Oh, they branched out. I mean, the idea in the old days where the farmer's son stayed on the farm, that's happening less and less out in the rural areas because they can now drive to Limerick, work in business.
Mhm.
You could even live in Limerick and work in Dublin. And like that is not unusual in the New York area to be traveling 2 hours, 2.5 hours, maybe spending a night or two, someplace, spending a night or two in Dublin and living in Limerick. I mean, the world is so different. It's hard to imagine. For people who were for people who grew up in the last, 30 years, they have no understanding and no perspective on this as to how the world has changed. But those of us who have been around a while and come from a different world have a different perspective. And that's a little bit unfortunate because people lose perspective when they don't experience it.
Yeah, they don't appreciate the change.
They
It's
don't
remarkable,
appreciate
even in the same family. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if if I'm with many of the employees I hire, they can't even imagine a world that ever existed without the iPad or the iPhone. And I tell the story, when I came over here, the only way I could communicate with my family, because there was no phones in Knockaderry, other than eventually there was a kiosk near the church, I had to write one. And, the letters took almost 2 weeks to go. And then my mother would get the letter. She would write back. It took 2 weeks to come back. I was here a month before I knew that she knew that I had arrived.
Yeah.
Right? And today your kid goes down to buy ice cream at the store, 100 yards away, and you're on the phone wanting to know if they're okay. A little bit too much protection, too much safety today.
Too much. Yeah. Yeah.
There needs to be a little bit more accountability, and some tough times, should not stress you out. And I get in trouble sometimes, including with staff, because I tell them that an element of stress is good for you.
Yeah. Or
if you don't ever experience it, how are you going to live in this world? So
I sometimes think that the earlier immigrants, they got over homesickness more quickly because they had to separate. It's almost, even with communication, I think it's almost harder to make the break because you can stay in touch.
you can stay in touch. Remember, every immigrant is an optimist because you don't leave one place and you don't leave home. You don't leave what you know, however bad it is, to go someplace else only with the hope that you can do better, that something better exists. You have to be an optimist to think like that. And no pessimist leaves home to try something new.
Certainly not across the ocean.
Not across the ocean. So, but it's great today that people can stay connected. But I do agree with you that you lose something by also being able to be connected all the time. I mean, we're all, we're so connected these days. We spend half our time connecting. If I would be a lot more productive if I got about 50% less of the stupid emails I get.
Spend half your morning just deleting the ones you don't really want to deal with anyway. So
everybody says that they're suffering from burnout. Part of it is you go home at night and you spend all your time trying to get rid of the stuff that people sent you during the day, and then worry about why you didn't talk to them during the day. Well, you work during the day, and you go home at night and you don't have any downtime anymore because you're connected all the time.
Right. Yeah, it's a vicious cycle.
Yeah.
Linda, do you see the notes in the chat box, the questions or the comments, excuse me?
Let me see. I think we answered that one. Thank you for the presentation. Just another woman saying she's received wonderful health care from Northwell's Staten Island University Hospital.
Oh, wonderful.
So, yeah.
Well, that's the way it's supposed to. That's the way it's supposed to be. You're not supposed to get bad healthcare when you go someplace. So that's what we try all the time. That's expectation should always be positive. Yeah.
She's also a native of Dublin and was a toddler when they emigrated, and she really enjoyed your inspiring immigration story.
Oh, thank you. Well, it's it's the story of millions from every part of the world. And some people had it very, very difficult, and other people had it not so difficult. And you do the best you possibly can, and you stay positive and upbeat to keep moving forward.
Yeah, and I think even for us non-immigrants, the story of hard work and education, I think, is the takeaway for across the board.
Yeah, and you have to learn how to deal with failure to be able to appreciate success. If every day is a wonderful day, then you're going to have an awful hard time when the day is bad.
Yeah, right.
And you're judged by how well you do in bad times. Just like, I was very intimately involved in all the COVID issue, and that was a test. But that's an extreme test. But we have those tests every day, and how you handle bad times defines you. Things happen to you in life. Is how you react to them that matters.
I agree. Okay. Well, thank you so much. I don't think we have any more questions. That was really wonderful. And thank you for sharing your afternoon with us. Thank you for all the good work you do out at the hospital and the work you did with New York State and everywhere. You've really touched a lot of lives.
And it's not over.
It's not over.
Yeah.
It's not
So
over.
I
That's
thank
right.
you so much. I appreciate the time, guys. Anytime I can be of help in any way, just let me know. Okay.
Oh, we appreciate that. Thank you
Thanks.
so much. And we'll be reviewing this book in our next edition. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Really, August.
Bye now. Thank you.
Great, thank you.